we will engage in a complete system shutdown on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of next week. No members of Unifor Local 111 and 2200 will report for work on those days. Picketing will begin at all locations, and we expect a complete shutdown of the bus system in Metro Vancouver as a result.
Welcome to this week's Focus BC. So people across Metro Vancouver bracing themselves for commuter chaos as bus and C-bus workers are getting ready to go on a full-scale 3-day walkout next week. Now, the union says they do have the public support, but a lot of people now getting very worried about how they're going to get around.
When they go out all together next week, what will you do?
I haven't figured that out yet, but I work 2 different jobs, so it's bicycle, I guess, and walking.
Well, it's definitely going to be difficult. I'm going to have to see if I can carpool, but I'm getting a little worried about everyone doing that and the traffic that's going to come with it.
That will affect us, obviously, because we travel by buses. All the students travel by buses, so it will affect us. Our classes, our work.
I got to go dish money out for a cab, money that I don't have, but...
Wait till next week.
I am relying on my coworkers to give me a ride to and from work.
I have to bike.
What, bike?
Yeah.
How far would that be?
That would be from Monday Street to maybe 14 kilometers.
Oh, get in shape then.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, Translink is condemning the action. We will speak to them in a few minutes. But first, let's bring in Gavin McGarrigle from Unifor. Gavin, you're in Whistler, though there's an annual meeting for the BC Regional Council is being held. A lot of your members are there. Are you all still very confident that taking this action is the right thing to do?
Well, it's really a step that we didn't want to have to take because this is the first time in 18 years that we've actually taken any kind of job action. We're entering week 3 of our strike, where we've simply refused some overtime. Translink clearly isn't getting the message. They continue to attack the workers and avoid dealing with the real issues. So we didn't want to have to go there, but we do know that the members are determined to reach a fair contract, and we do know a lot of the public, including students, are behind us.
You say you've got the public support. Do you think that's going to change once people start to feel the impact of your walkout?
Well, we know the public is frustrated, and we know that they're angry and upset, and they have every right to be. But what they're saying clearly to us, thousands of them, are saying that the blame lies squarely at the feet of Translink. And so we're going to have a large public rally next Thursday outside of Translink where the public can actually try to send a strong message to them that they're behind us.
Yeah, I hear you on that. But once people start to see how it's going to affect them, do you think that public support is going to turn against you?
No, I think it'll turn against Translink even more than it already is. I think they're going to be asking questions such as who is Translink accountable to? Why are they paying their executives 18 to 25%? Why aren't they listening to the reasonable concerns of the workers? And I think the public is going to get upset, but that anger will be directed where it should be, which is right at the feet of Translink.
I want to put it to you that all this week you have been saying that there's no wage parity, and you've been making the argument that workers in Toronto get about $3 an hour more. Isn't that an irrelevant argument, given that we do not have set wages in Canada? So it's a false economy.
Well, we know that the cost of living is high in Toronto, but the cost of living is actually higher here. The affordability crisis, the rent is much, much higher here than in Toronto. So what we're doing is we're saying, look, this is another large metropolitan city in Canada, and we think there should be a comparison. Translink was certainly happy to do it when they gave their CEOs tremendous wages. They looked at the comparison with Toronto, and Translink does recruit from all across Canada. So we think it's a fair and reasonable comparison. We don't expect to get there overnight. We don't expect to actually get there over the life of this agreement. We just want to take some significant steps to close that gap.
OK, how do you expect to get there without being at the bargaining table?
Well, what we need to do is have the employer realize that they're wrong in their approach. Blaming the workers and attacking them isn't going to get them a deal, and they need to, as we've been saying, have a complete system reset in the way that they approach negotiations. And as soon as they're prepared to do that, we can get this thing done. But right now, it appears that they are willing to take a disruption for the first time in 18 years.
I hear you on that, but what I don't hear is why you're not getting back to the table. This cannot be resolved unless you're talking at the table.
Right, but we can sit at a table and stare at each other, and if the company isn't serious about addressing the issues, it's not going to be very productive. We can be back at the table anytime that they're ready to seriously address the issues. We warned everyone last week. We did go back to the table. We did call their bluff to see if they were serious about negotiations, and we made some progress, but very quickly we realized that they weren't serious about addressing the outstanding issues, and that we mutually agreed, both sides, that we did need to walk away from the table because the gap was too large.
OK, the gap that you're talking about, Coast Mountain is offering 9% increase for drivers, 12% increase for tradespeople. You're asking for 15% over 4 years. You know, at which point does this meet? There's got to be some sort of negotiation here.
Yeah, absolutely, and we're prepared to compromise, and we indicated areas that we're prepared to compromise in. But the fact remains is that they completely reject a comparison with Toronto, and they have never really answered the question as to why SkyTrain skilled trades workers are paid so much more under the same system, with the same certifications, doing the same work. So they need to understand that those are valid comparisons, and then we can talk about how we address those issues. But so far, they've just completely rejected those comparisons outright, and until they acknowledge that those are real comparisons and they need to take steps to address it, we're not going to get a collective agreement.
Translink is saying there's about $150 million gap in wages. Why are you not willing to accept that they just can't find the money to meet your demands?
No, because we don't think they're credible at all. I mean, last week they were talking about figures of $608 million, and this is over 10 years. We're talking about a 3-year collective agreement. Now, all of a sudden, we had 1 day of negotiations. Now the figure's down to $150 million. The reality is in the expansion plan, there are all kinds of priorities. There are different ways that they can move things around. And we just don't think they're credible at all with their numbers. And so, you know, they need to figure out, instead of the big shiny projects that they want to move forward on, they can shuffle things around. We want to see an expanded system, but at the end of the day, we have no confidence that Translink is being honest with the public.
OK, listen, without getting into the minutiae of this, what figure do they need to put to get you back at the table, and in which case you can possibly avert this strike action altogether?
Well, the company knows exactly what they need to do. They need to acknowledge that those comparisons are real and come back and say that they're prepared to deal with the outstanding issues in a meaningful way.
Gavin, that's not going to happen. They're never going to get to the point where they're going to say you should be paid the same as Toronto, because you just can't compare province to province. You must know that that is not going to happen.
Well, they were certainly prepared to do it when they compared the CEO compensation. They certainly thought that that was acceptable as they headed into collective bargaining to give 18 to 25% wage increases. And it's not just us. We also know the QP SkyTrain workers are upset. You've seen not one shred of acceptance of responsibility on the part of Translink or Coast Mountain that there's a real problem here. Why is it, for the first time in 18 years, we've taken this step? Why is it that SkyTrain workers are upset? Why is it that thousands of members voted 99% to take this action? And why is it that they don't feel the accountability to the public? So at the end of the day, this is squarely at the feet of Translink and Coast Mountain. And if it's not going to happen by their actions, at the end of the day, we're confident that when the public speaks out, that they will be forced to act, because ultimately they're accountable. The Mayor's Council is meeting November 28th. It's time for the mayors who all support transit expansion to speak out and take control of Translink again and get it away from these unaccountable, overpaid executives.
Gavin McGarrigle from Unifor, thank you very much for your time. Let's speak now to the spokesperson for Translink. Ben Murphy is also with us. Ben, what's your reaction to what you've just heard?
Well, it's a fairly extraordinary comments there from Mr McGarrigle. I was quite interested, though, that he referenced QP and what's happening over at SkyTrain, because there's one very big difference with what you see in the SkyTrain process to what you are seeing with the Coast Mountain process, and that is that at SkyTrain, the union there has accepted mediation. They accept a mediator. That is something that both parties have agreed to, and as a result, there are 8 mediated talks that are set to begin next week. Now, just yesterday, Coast Mountain put to Mr McGarrigle, again, for the 4th time, can we get a mediator involved in this situation to help work through some of those differences, and once again the union rejected that offer. So the company is putting every effort forward to try and come to some sort of resolution here using a third party, given there is an impasse, but the union is just not willing to go down that step.
Well, that's very black and white. A mediator can only really step in and do the job if there's a level of the two sides being nearer than these two sides are right now.
Well, no, I don't accept that at all, actually. I mean, a mediator can get involved at any point in time and help resolve some of the issues and let the different parties see the perspectives and make some comparisons. But the union simply does not want to go back to the table. I mean, Sonia, the view of Mr McGarrigle seems to be capitulate to everything we want or else. I mean, there seems to be no sort of movement from them at all. And so the sensible step from Coast Mountain's view is get a mediator involved, a third party that can have a look at the situation and get the parties back to the table, because no one is going to strike an agreement if the parties are not at the table.
Well, what I hear from Mr McGarrigle is that they want some sort of reasonable offer, and what they're seeing right now from Coast Mountain is not reasonable in their view. I don't know whether you've had any conversations. Is Coast Mountain willing to move on its current offer?
Well, let's look at the facts, and I mean the facts are really important here. The offer on the table from Coast Mountain would see transit operators get a pay boost of $6,000 over 4 years, bringing their annual salary to just short of $70,000. The skilled trades, $10,000 pay boost, bringing their annual salaries to just under $90,000. Now, in this province, there are 2% increases for public sector. In this offer Coast Mountain's put forward, the transit operators are getting nearly 2.5, and what you're seeing for the skilled trades is more than 3. So I'm not sure how they can say this is in some way an unreasonable offer. Putting that to one side, they were also after a guaranteed minimum rest time for transit operators, and that is now part of the offer as well. So I think on any reasonable measure, Coast Mountain has put forward a very attractive offer. It's just that the union is being simply uncompromising on these matters.
I hear that, but if the union is sticking to what they're saying, is Coast Mountain willing to move on its current offer?
Well, we need to get back to the table. I mean, it's as simple as that. I don't know how they can sort of throw this on Coast Mountain and say, well, it's up to Coast Mountain. Well, what are you talking about? I mean, they're not even willing to go to mediation. They're not willing to compromise on anything. So this is a really frustrating situation for the company when the union is simply saying, give us everything, or we're going to shut down the system. I mean, that is an unacceptable situation, and it's very frustrating for commuters, and I think people increasingly are getting more and more angry at the situation, and the more they hear about the deal that's on the table, I think that rage is going to start to move squarely onto the union.
OK. How does this move forward, Ben?
Well, we think a mediator should be involved, and that has been put 4 times.
But they're not agreeing to that. So how does this move forward? They have said no to the mediator. You've confirmed that. They're not moving on what they're asking for. We know that. Now we're going to have a 3-day walkout. How does this situation move forward?
Well, it's unclear at this stage, Sonia. We keep putting to the union and impressing on them how important it would be to get a mediator involved. Coast Mountain has put that offer formally to them. Coast Mountain keeps talking about the offer on the table. The facts of this are really important, and that's why Coast Mountain has been so transparent. So I think you're seeing the public mood shift on this. We think that will continue over time, but from the company's perspective, that's all that can really be done at this point, is putting it on the table, because the question the union seems to refuse to answer, though I was very interested to hear Mr McGarrigle there, is where they want this money to come from. Okay. Early in the piece they said expansion, and then they kind of dialed back that sort of rhetoric, and now he seems to be delving into it again. So that's a question they seriously need to answer.
Very, very briefly, there have been strong arguments this week saying that public transport should be deemed an essential service in this province. Do you agree with that?
Well, look, that's ultimately a matter for the province. I mean, that has certain legal ramifications.
I know, but you must have a view on that.
Well, no, that's really a matter for the province if they wanted to explore that. I mean, from the perspective of Translink, we do believe in the bargaining process. We need to get back to the table. At this stage, offers of mediation have been made. The offer on the table is fair and reasonable, and the union needs to get realistic on their wage demands, or start to seriously answer the question of, do they want more taxes, do they want fares higher, or if they do want these shiny projects, as Mr McGarrigle puts it, cut, which shiny projects does he want sacrificed?
OK. Ben Murphy from Translink, thank you very much for your time today as well. Coming up, with some 350,000 people who use public transport in this region every day, how devastating is the impact of this action going to be? We'll be talking about that after a short break.
You're watching Focus BC on Global.
Welcome back. Well, a full three-day walkout by bus and C-bus workers next Wednesday, Thursday and Friday, set to bring transit across Metro Vancouver to a standstill. Peter Ladner is from the Better Transit and Transportation Coalition and joins us now. Peter, I know you're not taking any position on the strike, but how bad do you think it's going to get out there on those 3 days?
Well, I remember the last one, and it wasn't pretty. I think it'll be a very vivid illustration of how much we need and have to have transit to make this region function in so many ways.
You remember what happened in 2001. I know that affected ridership. How do you think it's going to affect ridership this time around?
Well, of course, it depends who goes out and how long and what routes and all the rest of it. But I think there's a real danger that we could lose the momentum that we have now. I mean, transit maybe a lot of people don't realize it, but transit in the Lower Mainland is on a roll, even though we have a lot of overcrowding and need for improvement. We're on track to get that improvement. We've got the rapid buses are coming to replace the B lines within 30 days. We've got alignment of our plans with the Mayor's Council, the different regional, federal, provincial funders. We've got money flowing from the provincial and the federal government, and we absolutely need to get transit, keep it going smoothly, and keep people understanding that we have the best transit system in North America, as judged by the peers in the transit business, and we have the biggest improvements in transit ridership in North America, and we can't lose that momentum.
When you have a 3-day walkout, how much does that hurt the economy?
Well, it hurts it in so many ways. It ties up deliveries, of course. A lot of people can't get to work. Where they do, they get there late. It wreaks havoc. And it's not just the economy, of course. It's people getting to doctor's appointments, people getting their kids to school and soccer practices, students getting to university. All of it, so much of it depends on transit to work smoothly.
I did put this question to Ben Murphy, and he didn't really want to take a position on it. I wonder whether you do. Talk of bringing the transport system into the legislation that protects essential services in this province. Do you think that needs to happen?
I'm not about to say that. We have representatives of Unifor on our board, and they obviously don't think that, and I can't really speak for the Better Transit and Transportation Coalition on that, but I would say that whatever happens to disrupt transit will make it very apparent how important it is, if not essential in the sense of life and death, for the same way nurses and hospitals are, but very important to the region. And I really, really hope they can come to a resolution quickly. Okay.
I know you don't want to take a position, but without doing so, the fact that the union has said if the issue is finding the money, you've got to scale back on expansion across Metro Vancouver. What effect would that have on this region if the expansion plans that are currently there were scaled back?
Well, I think devastating is a strong word, maybe too strong, but they would have a very harmful effect. We're already going to see huge increases in overcrowding in the next 3 years if we can't go even beyond what we've already planned to do. And it would just be a very bad thing. And I hope it doesn't happen.
Like, do you feel that there's any of those expansion plans could be scaled back, or you're saying all of them are essential, given the fact that more people live here now?
Well, the Better Transit and Transportation Coalition, as you may know, came together around the referendum when a lot of organizations from right across the political, social perspective came together to say how important transit is and transportation expansion is. And the finding funding, we lost that referendum. Finding funding is never easy. And if the funding all has to be diverted to places it's not budgeted for salary increases, and it results in a curtailment or derailment of the expansion. That will not be a good thing. We are looking at, if we have 1 million more people coming to this region in the next, by 2040 or 2050 or what it's going to be, we're expecting maybe 750,000 new vehicles coming onto the roads. We don't have the capacity to deal with that. It has to be funneled into transit and, of course, other improvements and changes like ride sharing and so on. But transit will always be the backbone of alternatives for people to driving their own vehicles.
It's very...
And
Yeah, well, thank you very much for your time. It's really interesting to hear that perspective. Peter Ladner from the Better Transit and Transportation Coalition. Coming up, when will the government step in? Will they step in? Keith Baldry and Richard Zussman from Victoria are next.
You're watching Focus BC on Global.
My thinking is shaped by my absolute understanding that free collective bargaining has worked around the world for a long, long time, and the best way to resolve this dispute is to have the parties mindful that the people that they serve are desperate to have that service. Let's find a way forward at the table, and I'm confident they'll be able to do that.
So no sign right now that the government is planning to step in. Let's bring in Keith Baldry and Richard Zussman from Victoria. What do you make of this? At what point do they decide it's appropriate to get involved?
Yeah, well, I think John Horgan and his Labour Minister Harry Bains are taking the right approach here. They're not wanting to dive into this too early. Literally, I think we could be at the 11th hour on Tuesday night before you might see some major action from the government. Now, they've got to get through this weekend because the NDP is meeting in convention, Rich, and as you know, there's a lot of tensions within the NDP when it comes to interfering in labour disputes. So once that's out of the way, on Monday, I expect Harry Bains to be under a lot of pressure to exercise at least one of the options he's got at his disposal in the Labour Code. That includes appointing a mediator or appointing what's called a special mediator, which has a little extra powers to compel people to talk to him, asking the Labour Relations Board to designate essential service levels, which you talked to both our guests earlier on it, Sonia. Also, he can require the employees to vote on what's called a directed vote, an offer from the employer, the last offer on the table. He can require the employees to vote on that. He can also send in a fact finder. He's got a number of things at his disposal that stop short of imposing a contract. And I think he's going to have to employ at least one of them on Monday, Tuesday, before this thing gets off the rails.
And political pressure, Sonia, always based on public pressure. So we're going to start seeing concerned constituents go to their MLAs and say, first off, I'm worried about a potential strike. And then when the strike inevitably happens next week, they will say, I can't survive with this. And their MLAs will be forced to respond. I think that's often when governments do respond. There are some ways that they can start getting creative here, Sonia. One of them potentially is the Transportation Minister, Claire Trevena, asking the Passenger Transportation Board to speed up applications for ride-sharing and potentially get those ride-sharing vehicles on the road next week to alleviate some of the pressure of a strike. But the province has said they're not interested in that at this point. But I think at this point, it's time to start thinking outside the box to try to help people deal with what likely will be a very chaotic situation.
I think we're headed towards a piece of legislation, perhaps with an extended sitting of the legislature into the following week, which would impose a cooling off period on the parties. We've seen that happen before, and I think that's where we're headed on this one.
Okay, just very, very quickly. I mean, when they're talking about finding extra money, just clarify this for us. Does Translink, do they make any money? Is there extra money that can be found?
No. There's no extra money. There's even less money than there was perhaps 6 months ago because government revenues are down, not up. Right.
All right. OK, listen, thank you very much, both of you, for your perspectives on that as well. Stay with us for all the updates on how this strike action will affect people. We'll have all the lowdown on Global News Online and on Global BC. Thanks very much for watching.